But the thing that's most dangerous is, and it's the hardest to kind of wrap, kind of get your arms around because it's not a physical thing, is kind of a deep intelligence in the network. He said, well, what harm could a deep intelligence in the network do? So, well, it could start a war by doing fake news and spoofing email accounts and fake press releases, and just by manipulating information. The pen is mightier than the sword. I mean, as an example, I want to emphasize, I do not think this actually occurred. This is purely a hypothetical that I'm digging my grave here. But there was that second Malaysian airliner that was shot down on the Ukrainian-Russian border, and that really amplified tensions between Russia and the EU in a massive way. Well, let's say if you had an AI that was where the AI's goal was to maximize the value of a portfolio of stocks. One of the ways to maximize value would be to go long on defense, short on consumer, start a war. And then how could it do that? Well, hack into the Malaysian Airlines aircraft routing server, route it over a war zone, then send an anonymous tip that an enemy aircraft is flying overhead right now.
But I think generally I look for a positive attitude, and are they easy to work with? Are people going to like working with them? It's very important to like the people you work with. Otherwise, life, your job is going to be quite miserable. And in fact, we have a strict no assholes policy at SpaceX, and we fire people if they're. I mean, we give them a little bit of warning, but if they continue to be an asshole, then they're fired.
That's innovative, right?
Yeah. Because if your boss is an awful person, you're going to hate coming to work.
When SpaceX started, I think the first 3 rocket launches weren't successful.
Yeah.
And the fourth one was. What would have happened if the fourth one hadn't worked?
We would have failed. Yeah.
But let's talk about one of the failures were spectacular. I would go out to the island, Kwajalein, with Elon, and seeing giant exploding rockets is quite an amazing sight. And I was one of the early investors in SpaceX, and I said, you know what? If all I get to do is to see these rockets explode, well worth every dime I put into this company.
There's something to be said about brotherly support.
But it was an amazing thing to watch what Elon had built with those rockets on a shoestring in the middle of nowhere, and literally the middle of the Pacific, 2,000 miles from Hawaii. And that experience, we'd fly in these what are they called? What are those
Hueys?
helicopters? The Hueys. You fly in the Hueys. You feel like you're right out of Apocalypse Now, flying to Dr. Evil's island. Really amazing. And again, worth every penny, still to this day, I'd say. So I think the failures were actually unbelievably exciting to be part of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Elon.
You're welcome. Well, it is actually, I find it quite tough when there are very high expectations. I try to actually tamp down those expectations as to be possible. In fact, I've gone on record several times as saying that the stock price is higher than we have any right to deserve, and that's for sure true based on where we are today and have been in the past. So the stock price obviously reflects a lot of optimism about where Tesla will be in the future. And now the thing that makes that quite a difficult emotional hardship for me is that those expectations sometimes get out of control, and I hate disappointing people, and so I'm like trying real hard to meet those expectations. But that's a pretty tall order, and a lot of times it's really not fun. I have to say, a whole lot less fun than it may seem. So, yeah. I mean, I don't ever sell any stock unless I have to for taxes. So, you know, I've said publicly, I'm not going to like take money off the table. You know, I'll be last. I'm going down with the ship. So I'll be the last to do it. Yeah, I mean, it's. Oh, I really wouldn't recommend anyone start a card company. I really wouldn't recommend it. It's not a recipe for happiness and freedom. I mean, I've had conversations with quite smart and well-read people who don't understand that there's like a surface carbon cycle, but if you dig stuff up from deep underground and add it to the surface carbon cycle, that fundamentally changes the chemical equilibrium of the surface of the Earth. And they're like, wow, really? Yeah, definitely. You know, like there's just conservation of mass is not totally obvious to people. Okay. You know, like you can't just create new carbon from nothing. You have to
and you can't
get it from somewhere.
Just disappear.
Yeah, it doesn't disappear. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, just like basic stuff like that would be like great to educate people on.
Actually, the best thing to do is just to either put a penalty on carbon CO2 creation, or next best, not as good, is to provide an incentive for electric vehicles and for sustainable energy generation. We could say, like, you know, what is the maximum parts per million of CO2 that we would consider acceptable? You know, every year the CO2 ppm ratchets up. It's like a ratchet. So it's kind of like being on the rack. You know, it's like the stretching rack, the little torture device. You know, probably, you know, you got on the rack at first, doesn't feel that bad. You know, crank it up a few notches, kind of stretches out your back, not too bad. But then you keep ratcheting further and further, and it becomes excruciating. So that's where we're headed. So you have to say, what's the maximum ppm that we would consider acceptable for Earth? Is it 500, 600, 800? That sets our bank account of carbon that's acceptable in the atmosphere. And then you have to say, well, what's this acid level in the ocean that's acceptable? And if we can just agree on what those numbers are, then we can price that boundary accordingly. I think we'll find it's a very high price. And currently we're selling it for zero.
This is really like the scariest problem to me, I'll tell you. Yeah, so I really think we need government regulation here, just because this is, you know, ensuring the public good is served. Because you've got companies that are racing, that kind of have to race to build AI, or they're going to be made uncompetitive. You know, like essentially, if your competitor is racing to build AI and you don't, they will crush you. So then you're like, we don't want to be crushed. So, you know, I guess we need to build it too. That's where you need the regulators to come in and say, hey guys, you all need to really, you know, just pause and make sure this is safe. And like when it's cool and we're convinced, and the regulators are convinced that it's safe to proceed, then you can go. But otherwise, slow down. But you kind of need the regulators to do that for all the teams in the game. You know, otherwise the shareholders will be saying like, hey, why aren't you developing AI faster? Because your competitor is. I'm like, okay, we've got to do that. Anyway, so it's like, I mean, there's like something like 12% of jobs are transport Transport will be one of the first things to go fully autonomous.